Welcome to Cancer and Peace. My name is Sean Stewart. I'm the facilitator of this particular podcast, and our host is Peter Scalzo. And today we're going to put Peter on the hot seat with some really good questions. And he had put this emotionally healthy spirituality day by day into my hands, and it has just really great lessons. And I think one of our favorite topics is the wall, because we see the value of it in, we would use the word discipleship, but growth, spiritual growth, connection. And so are you ready to be on the hot seat today?
I don't like the sound of it. I didn't know that's what today was going to do. We do these podcast episodes. We do them. We don't rehearse anything really. So, okay, I'll be in the hot seat.
You're going to play.
Hot.
It's going to be hot. Yeah. That'll be good.
Boy.
Yeah. I think, one of the things that, as you said, we don't rehearse, but as Peter was saying, hey, I don't have to do anything. It's your job to lead this where we're going to go. And so he set himself up.
I don't want to do anything. You do it all.
So I really love this concept, or this topic. I don't like being in it, but the wall. And the wall is this place where John of the Cross called it the refining fire. And so, and we've talked about this. We talked about the wall last week, because that was, we talked on one of these, and the refining fire is it's hot. It's not a fun place to be, but there's a lot of growth. And I think both of us know there's certain things that can only be accomplished in the wall. And the wall, and John of the Cross defined it as the dark night of the soul. And so this particular Devo that you had kind of put in my hands was really connecting from John of the Cross and the lessons. And I'm going to read this little spot here. It says this is from Emotionally Healthy Spirituality Day by Day. But it says, for this reason, John of the Cross wrote that God sends us the dark night of loving fire to free us from such deadly spiritual imperfection as pride, being judgmental and impatient with the faults of others, avarice, and then it has in parentheses, suffering, discontentment. Next one, luxury, taking more pleasure in our spiritual blessings than in God himself. Wow. Wrath, becoming easily irritated or impatient. So he's defining these. Spiritual gluttony, resisting the cross. That's how he defined it. Spiritual envy, always comparing ourselves to others. And the last one he had in the list, and sloth, running from what is hard.
Oh, man.
And so the hot seat is, in your cancer journey, pick one of these that you say, hey, God really needed to have the cancer journey wall hit your life. You know, how did you, because John on the Cross's point is, hey, the wall is the one thing that brings these things into focus and brings us to a place of healing with those, or to where and without the wall, and I think it's so true. It's like, would I deal with sloth in my own life without the wall? And I think the answer is no.
Yeah, I mean, I'm just going to mention three big walls. When I usually talk about walls, I talk about these three big walls. And the first one was a 6-year drug addiction journey with my daughter, which was pretty intense, very involved. She had really was a reckless drug user, and even overdosed and totaled cars, criminal record, all that stuff. And she's doing great today, but that 6 years was really hard for myself and my wife as we journeyed with her through that. And then relationship struggles, and key relationship, which is my marriage, was just in a very difficult place. And we had a crisis event in our marriage, and ended up and I ended up in a place of deep hurt, and we ended up in a place of counseling. And so in the context of that is another wall. And then 1 year after that event, I had my game changer 14 surgery in 2015, 3 surgeons, metastatic cancer. You have a 5% chance to live. Sloan Kettering saying, why don't you go home and call hospice? Major walls. And I'm just going to pick one. The first thing running from what's hard. I was I was picked in high school. A superlative, which they didn't even have it, was they actually made it up for me, was best excuses and rationalizing. So
Wow.
running from what is hard, that would have been my middle name. But the first one you mentioned, pride, certainly pride. I mean, with all those, because I wanted to present a certain image. Isn't pride one of them?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah. Being judgmental and impatient is what
impatient,
with faults of
judgmental.
others is the way he defined it in pride. And
Yeah.
I want to talk about that in a second, but
Okay.
go ahead. I want to highlight. I want to talk a bit about these character things here. When I read this, and I'll let you have that. I want to hear what you have to say in this. Saint Bernard of Clairvaux, he wrote this book, and it was really cool. It was like he was asked to write about the steps to humility, and so and what he did is he wrote, I think it was 12. He wrote the 12 steps to pride. And when he gets to it, you're kind of like, well, the book's getting thinner and thinner. So I'm reading this book, and it's like, these are really good. He writes how you get to pride, and it has the characteristics I just read to you underneath of pride, like sloth and so forth. And there was others.
Pride's like an overarching.
Yeah, so that's the reason why I was mentioning it was that. But the way John of the Cross defined it here, he kind of made it its own category. So it's not as a correction. It's like just when you think about what's going on, I think. The real interesting thing is when Bernard got to the end of the book, and I was like, there's only like 3 pages left. How is he ever going to get to humility? And he was like, I actually don't know how to get to the steps of humility, but if I'm guessing, it's probably doing the opposite of these things. It was just kind of an interesting...
Well, I'm just going to declare that without my dark nights of the soul, I would not be in a place where I am today. And I'm going to talk about what those things that God was refining in me. I mean,
and he highlights them really well. John of the Cross highlights these really well in broader categories. But and I think, why would we want to talk about this in the cancer podcast? Because it's a wall.
Yes.
For almost everybody who goes through this, this is a major wall in their life. And there's highlighting something. John of the Cross is saying this is a refining fire. And when you refine, you're taking out the dross. And so we just listed a list of dross, and most of us do what you said. We make excuses for the dross in our own lives, and so best excuses. I think this is something that I can relate to. As you said that, I was like, I get it. I have an excuse for my own.
Blaming others, best excuses. So, but I think this crescendo of my daughter, those things that were precious to me, for instance, a child, my marriage, my health, those kinds of things, image, those things that I held out and said, wow, I absolutely can't live without these things, kind of thing. And I remember in that 14 surgery, that game changer, metastatic cancer, in that room, ICU room, facing my own demise, that I felt completely stripped down to nothing, bare nothing. Or you would say the fire had just burned, and there was nothing left but the ashes, and that's how I felt. And I think that the first of all with my daughter, I often tell people I was a perfect parent, and then I started having kids. So the concept of me judging others for how they were raising their kids, or judging someone for how they are in their marriage, for instance, all that, man, did God deal with me with that by showing me my own failures and my own pain, failure, disappointment, just using that as a refining fire to show me my dross, my defects of character. I mean, when I got into recovery, and it was as a result of not only my daughter's journey, but the issues within my marriage relationship, I looked inside for the first time and had to burrow through that pride. God had done that. God had drilled down through that, and I was able to access what You were going to say something or no?
I wanted to, when you finished that point, I wanted to kind of just, because
Okay.
you're right.
Yeah.
You still highlighted as pride. I'm actually,
Yeah.
I kind of wonder, is there three separate things? Because you listed three walls.
Yeah.
Is there something distinct in each one that line up with some of these things that John on the Cross talked about here? Or do you think it's still like a high level?
Well, I think the, it's interesting. I'm going to make a statement, which is, in order to get to a place of humility, and I had tried everything within my own efforts to get to that place. I grew up in the church. I started following Christ at age 10, studied the scriptures, went to Christian college, went to a Christian law school, service within the church, everything. But that humility was not really present.
Well, can I pause you on that then for
Yeah.
a second? Because you said you had tried everything to get to humility. I did those same steps
Yeah.
that you did in many ways, or had a very similar parallel experience. But I don't think I was pursuing humility. I think I was pursuing spiritual blessing. In my own, if I were to be honest about, hey, what was I really pursuing? It wasn't a pursuit of humility.
Mm-hmm.
There was a recognition that we're supposed to be humble. But in my own life, I don't think I was pursuing humility. So it's interesting when you say there was a pursuit of humility.
Yeah.
Do tell, like what makes you say that in that way?
Just a pursuit of being Christ-like in the sense of how he was humble and gentle and those things.
So you recognize you needed humility.
Yeah, I
and
needed
so as
it.
a way, like if you could accomplish that, you would be
Yes, in my own
pursuing
efforts.
God in some manner your own. Okay,
Yes,
that makes
yes.
sense. Yeah, I can see that.
Yeah, but it was not until God intervened in me and using the deep walls to show me my character defects and my pride, and I don't have the list in front of me
I know.
that you read, and maybe that's a good thing.
This is the gift of being the facilitator and having the book on my lap.
Yeah.
That means I get to control.
But definitely, if I could describe myself, it would definitely be very concerned about image. I mean, codependency was a biggie for me, which is really needing the approval of others, not just seeking it, but actually needing it. And then,
So let me ask
yeah.
in that, because you're just as you're on that.
Mhm.
When you had a daughter who was struggling with a drug addiction,
yeah,
did that directly attack
Yes.
because you said, hey, I was what is it? Everybody's a perfect parent until they have kids.
yeah,
And so you had this image of what being a great
Yeah.
parent looked like.
Yeah.
And then all of a sudden now you have a daughter who's struggling with a drug addiction.
yes.
Did you attach that to your parenting in some way? And this is a way of, hey, the very fact
Yes.
that you had a daughter who's in some ways failing in this area of life,
Yes.
because having an addiction is a failure in our lives in some manner.
Yep.
And you were it was almost like it was taking that image directly on of
Yes.
you.
I mean, I think that my wife and I pursued a certain Christian, I won't call it perfectionism because we knew we wouldn't attain that, but we homeschooled, church all the time, controlled what they watched, all that sort of stuff. So yeah, there was a sense of if we just control their exterior world, they're going to line up perfectly.
Man.
This bursts that apart.
And that was also false. That's
Yes.
that by itself is a false belief,
Yes,
right? And
exactly. Yeah.
The only way you could shed that is to have it shattered in front of you.
Exactly. And same thing with this. I'm a perfect husband and I'm an attorney. I serve in the church. I have 6 children. We have a nice house providing. I must be a good husband. And yet my failure as to be a supportive, good partner for my wife showed up. And it takes two to tangle, but I had my issues that came out of that relationship crisis of pointing character defects out in me, such as unhealthy anger. and pride.
I have some interesting questions. I think they're interesting to me anyway. So whether anybody else finds them interesting is it? But today,
I just wanted to make this one point before you make it.
okay,
Everything had to do with control. I can control my kids, I can control my marriage, and I can control my health. And God obliterated that.
yes. So
I'm sorry, go ahead.
And we've had this conversation about small story. So what you're basically saying is, I had to have my small story narrative crashed. And why I say that is like whenever you are in control, that means you are a mini God for yourself, which is a small story. Your story is what you're trying to make happen, and God has a larger story. And it fits in with my question of where I'm going. Is like when you view your daughter's situation now, years later, and having gone through the wall, you felt one way towards her, I'm going to bet, at the time. Not that you didn't love her, but yeah, I bet you there was feelings towards her. How does that look as you look back from the wall versus how you were looking towards the wall as you were going into it? Meaning that I think there's a understanding that was gained in this wall too, and how what love looks like, what's healthy in our own.
Oh, yeah. Well, I mean, yeah, I guess it's hard for me to pick one thing because it was such an emotional space for me. But like definitely, for instance, what does love look like? That definitely, when I had to exercise tough love a few times and force her out of the house, that was a different type of love, right? And it was really hard for me to do. I was not one to step into conflict and uncomfortable. What was it? Running away from things that are hard?
Yes.
Definitely me.
Yes.
And
I'm glad you talked about that a bit.
Yeah.
And I don't do it as a picking a scab. I actually think that there is a healed something. That's what I wanted to highlight a bit. It wasn't so much about trying to show a negative. It was your small story said, if you could control this,
yes,
if you could manage this, then maybe you could manage her towards healing.
Yes.
And God actually had a story of healing for her life.
Yeah.
You guys have a great relationship, and you see what God's done in her life, but she had to go through her own wall.
Yep.
And I think so much of the time it's like we want to protect our kids and the people around us from the walls. And it's the large story that God wants to use for their journey of being, drawing near and for their own healing in their own life.
Yeah. I mean, I did not know what boundaries were until I had these walls, the marriage wall and this wall. And, and that it's healthy to have boundaries when it's necessary. And I thought that I could make people happy.
And would you have ever taken that on your life without the wall?
No.
And why? I mean, why wouldn't you have taken it on without the wall?
It was something not on my radar screen at all. It was, and I was definitely unaware of these things within myself. I thought, and that's what's called denial and in recovery circles, but I thought that I was a really good guy and life was perfect, and here I am. Look at me.
Yes. There's a concept in recovery, and I'll probably butcher it here, but I love what the reason why, and it's like the pain of doing the same thing is greater than the pain of actually addressing it in the way it needs to be addressed.
Oh, man.
That's what draws someone into the recovery journey. It's like if I do the same thing I've been doing, that pain is so much greater now than looking at an alternative that says, hey, I'm now going to walk through that door and deal with this very issue. And it sounds like you ran into that with your daughter.
Yeah.
And you had to make some really hard, loving decisions. And then you ran into that with your wife in your own journey there. And it was about yourself, your own journey.
And I had to make some hard, loving decisions there also.
That's right.
Yeah.
You did.
Yep.
And now bring me to the cancer, because I think there's something a little bit different in the cancer journey on that wall than those two had some similarities to them in different ways in different areas. They were both about control.
Yep.
You mentioned control for the cancer journey, but it seems somewhat more obvious that you couldn't control that nobody could. And maybe I'm curious about that. What was?
Yeah, I was a big workout fiend and eating the right foods and basically thinking I could control somewhat my health and my body.
Mm-hmm.
And then getting hit. I mean, I had 10 years of a major surgery starting it off, and then many other surgeries in between, and thought, okay, well, I'm a cancer survivor. It's over. I got this,
Yeah.
And then in 2015, 10 years after the first surgery, then it was like, oh, hold on. This is going to take my life. It was like a death with the sickle and all that, and with the cape, the symbol of the person who brings death, came front and center and was staring in my face. Hold on. To me, death was a failure. And it was like, hold on.
Yeah.
This is the final blow. I'm done.
And you lost control. I get that.
Totally.
Yeah. There's other things that happened on this journey, because you've defined this something that I would call the stripping. You were stripped naked of so much in your life in this point. The number of times you've referred to, hey, you were down to 7 banker boxes of stuff in your life, which is pretty amazing compared to where you were as a successful attorney, large family, coming from a family who was well established, had businesses and things happening. Here you are, you're stripped down to a 1-bedroom apartment with 7 banker boxes. I think. Is that fair? Is that the right words?
Yeah, I mean, I had Leslie had moved to North Carolina, and I was going to go back and forth. And 2017, after another recurrence, it was, there's nothing more we can do for you. So go home and call hospice, stop working. And at the same time, the main residence, all the stuff that we had in our other house, which we had sold, was moved to North Carolina. And my brother owned an apartment building. So I got an 800 square foot apartment. I had a bed, a chair, a leather chair, and a couch. I didn't even have a kitchen table at first. No, I think I might have at first. And then
TV tray.
Yeah, probably. And I had like Polaroid pictures kind of thing that I used thumbtacks. That was my pictures on my wall next to my chair.
Yes.
And I had the banker boxes upstairs. I even had, for my dressers, I had the plastic drawers, because in my mind, this was a temporary place. I was going to transition to heaven. I was not going to be here long. And I had and the title and the banker boxes were like cancer. By that time, divorce. I was in the process of divorce. Like taxes. I was keeping my tax records, and I did have some stuff for like Celebrate Recovery Ministries that I was involved in. But I didn't have, like, in the bedroom, I didn't have anything else but the banker boxes, these plastic drawers.
I think this is such a fascinating thing because you and I have both, in some ways, experienced relative wealth.
Yeah.
And I don't mean just just being in the U.S., living in this environment. Everybody here is experiencing some type of relative wealth.
Yeah.
And this idea of, he speaks here, John Lacrosse uses the word avarice, and it's suffering discontentment. Now, in the other things you said, you didn't recognize that you even had this certain, you were unaware, you were in denial that you even had this need to control.
Yeah.
And I think as for myself, and I know there's many here that are probably listening to this we accumulate things. And many times it's to try to bring a measure of contentment. And here in your journey, it was all stripped away. And what I find fascinating, what I've seen in you from my chair, is someone who's found great contentment. You would probably show up at church before. You were well dressed. You were all put
I have
together.
the same clothes now, though.
You
right?
only have one outfit or two that you wear now.
Yeah.
You are one of the most content people now in little things, and just in little. You don't need wealth. You don't need all the trappings of that. And I think that can only be brought from our context through the wall.
Yeah.
Because you get down to what's really important.
Yeah. We had a 7-bedroom, 4,700 square foot house with at one time 7 vehicles in the driveway because we had 7 drivers with 6 kids. Yeah. But we had all the stuff. I think the getting acquainted with my passing, getting acquainted with the prospect of my own death was incredibly painful because I had a fear there, but what an incredible blessing, because I got used to the fact that, whoa, I'm going to transition to heaven. And I became more heaven focused, which may sound a little weird, but man, was it an amazing journey. And I often said I have 1 foot in eternity and 1 foot on earth. And the simple stuff in life is all that I need. I have a beautiful truck at home with low mileage, but I drive my beater car all the time.
Yeah.
Just because it's fine for me. I don't care. It gets me from point A to point B. But yeah, I mean, much less.
You're not focused on it now.
No, pursuit of money is.
I think there's a difference between.
Yeah.
You still have a measure of wealth.
Yeah.
Today, and I don't want to. There's no disparagement of that. The point is that you don't find contentment there.
Right.
And you're not pursuing contentment there.
Right.
And that's the lesson at the wall in my mind, is that, and it's not that I felt like you were over focused on pursuing that, but in some ways, all of us, as we go through the wall, we find that we don't know, because we're in denial. We don't know these things about ourselves until we get to that point where the biggest decisions in life, the meaning of life itself, is put in front of us, and we have to make hard choices.
Yeah.
And step into, is the pain of making that hard choice less than the pain of staying where you're at?
Yeah.
It's this recovery concept.
And I think the wall of the cancer space, and most of the time I talk about that 15th surgery or 14th, where the metastatic cancer showed up, 5% survival rate, and lying in ICU, in a dark ICU in the hospital for a month, thinking that I would not leave that hospital, that I would do an end of life process there, or if I did make it out of there, the end of life process would happen quickly. That was an incredible game changer. The process that I had of writing in the journal, recording what I felt God was saying, feeling his spirit, feeling his presence. But I think for me, it would have been setting aside my agenda, any remnants of it that were left, because there weren't many remnants left, setting aside my agenda and taking up God's agenda for my life. And I think I didn't understand what it meant to take up my cross until I realized that I needed to die to self. And I needed to say, it's not about me. It's about you, Jesus.
That's a really good place for us to land this episode, because I think that's exactly what he puts in here, the question to consider on this day by day. And it's that, what are some unhealthy attachments or idols God wants you to remove from your life in order to lead you to a deeper, richer communion with him? That's the purpose. It's not just, hey, I want to be less prideful. It's not, I want to be more humble. I want to have less of these. It's like, I want deeper, richer communion. And so that's been your journey. And so he writes this prayer, and I think a great way to know where you're at is do an honest assessment. Listen to this first part of this prayer and do an honest assessment of whether you really want to ask for this prayer. And here it is. Lord, I invite you this day to cut any unhealthy attachments or idols out of me. Can you pray that and mean it, knowing what we just talked about, what it means? And if there is holdback in you, it's telling you something about what's going on. And God's going to accomplish his work in all of our lives one way or the other. And so that's why we, one of the great things, and we'll talk about it in an upcoming episode, is this idea of God disciplines his sons and daughters, not for purposes of harming them, but for this purpose of
that
growth.
Prayer, he uses the word cut, and it
Yes.
just reminds me of like a surgeon's blade. And that brings me back to 2005 for my first major surgery, where I felt that the Lord had spoken to me and said, I'm going to cut out the physical cancer, and I'm going to cut out the spiritual cancer too. And it's like, oh no.
Yeah.
I mean, but the place you get to, that healed place, there's scars, right? There's scars, and you've been through the trauma of that process, but you are much different. I think you're in a much better place. Different.
Yeah.
Better.
Well, my hope is that people that listen to your story in this episode will understand. We talk about the wall and the concept a lot, but this was about lessons at the wall, and we get to just examine your life on lessons that you've learned at the wall, and maybe you'll be able to embrace your journey, your cancer journey, and recognize that there is an invitation to deep communion with God, and these are for your growth, for our growth as we go through this hard stuff. And so my hope is that you can pray to God, hey, God, I open you up to cut that out of my life, which is holding me back from deep relationship and peace in my life.
Amen. Thanks, Sean. Appreciate it.
Blessings, everyone.
Blessings.